We had a little bit of a bumpy start on this show. We're actually trying to reopen the room, but bear with us if it's a little bit confusing. If you're listening to this in replay or in podcast, you might not know this, but we actually run a live show here. We're live on Clubhouse every Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern. We do the show, starts Serial Entrepreneur, Secrets Revealed. And we have fascinating speakers who come on stage and share with us their expertise. And you have an opportunity to actually get on stage and ask questions and sometimes share some of your expertise as well on stage here on Clubhouse. It's a really fascinating platform if you're not already on Clubhouse. It's something to consider joining. And we have about 920,000 members who follow Startup Club. And if you're not already doing so, we recommend that you do follow Startup Club. Mimi Ostrander writes our blog, and she does a really great job. It's at www.startup.club. And if you do want to find out the speakers that are coming on over the next few weeks, please sign up to that mailing list, because what we do is once a week we'll send out a mailer announcing who are the speakers for that week. And we have some incredible speakers coming on. I know today we have two very good speakers as well. My co-moderator, Michelle Van Tilburg, she will be joining us shortly as well. And hopefully we will get this kicked off. Edna,
All
welcome.
right.
Oh, there
I'm
she is. I can't
here.
even see you, Michelle.
I'm
I,
here.
I can't see you.
Yep. Pull to
I see
refresh.
I see Edna. I see
Pull
you
to
now. I
refresh.
see you. I got you. I got you. I
Yes.
got you. All right.
Awesome.
I'm going to let you take it away from here, Michelle.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're very excited to have the two gentlemen here that are joining us on stage. Manu Rekai, and I hope I'm saying that right. You correct me if I'm not, Manu. Manu is the managing director at Inventus Capital. So we have, a VC here in the audience with us. Manu is also going to tell us how we can contact him should we have any questions or any ideas, etc., that are good for him and his company. And then we have his partner with him, who is Ricardo. Ricardo is a data scientist and he was the founder of DataFlare. Ricardo also does teaching, college teaching at universities like Cornell and Berkeley. So we feel very honored to have these two gentlemen here with a very extensive resume. And when they approached us about, what would the members of Startup Club enjoy hearing, we talked a lot about how do entrepreneurs figure out the formulas? How do they figure out how to propel the growth of their company? So they have fully embraced this topic. They have worked with many different companies, funding them as well as getting them started and successful. So without further ado, we want to jump in to start the conversation. And they have also prepared a presentation. So this is kind of the first time that we've done this. Mimi, are you going to pin it, the link?
Yes, I'll pin it.
Yeah, Mimi is going to put it up here and pin the link. So if you care to, you can just click on that link and you can follow along this really cool presentation that they've put together alongside with their talks. So I don't know about the rest of you, but we're often these days just swimming in data, and you can't hardly like look at media, any or LinkedIn or anything business oriented, even the news, without hearing about the importance of data today. Data scientists obviously is a very popular field right now. So these gentlemen are going to tell us how to wade through tons of data and figure out very quickly what is actionable and what is working and what is not working. So I'm very excited to hear this. I am actually a data lover myself. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Manu. Why don't you give us a little bit more introduction about yourself and your company and the role that data plays in helping these startups grow? Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm really glad to be joining this conversation. I started my career designing products as a product manager, and then over the years, as I started to get more experience, eventually I ended up joining a venture firm that I was actually an investor in. And so the last 13 years now, I've been doing full-time investments through the venture fund and Ventus Capital. And we do early stage seed startups in technology. And they're split between Silicon Valley and India. And we do both SaaS enterprise companies as well as consumer startups as well. And we use companies that leverage data to be able to make decisions and be able to move faster than their peers. So Ricardo and my journey started back in 2005 when I was leading Gmail. So I was working in Google. I was leading Gmail, Orchid, which is a social networking site, and Calendar. And we ended up collaborating. He was in Brazil, and we were trying to figure out why our products were doing so well and had asymptotical growth. And Ricardo was able to put together the analysis and details that allowed us to figure out and then be leveraging it to then actually approach new markets as well. So we were doing data science before the word was coined. I had a scientific background in biochemistry, molecular bio, so I was setting up experiments just like I would do a scientific experiment, trying to sort of figure things out, and asking the right questions, is probably 90% of the battle. We're swimming data these days. Data is very plentiful, but asking the right questions and being able to find those needles in haystack is sort of the essence of what data science is all about. So I'll stop talking and I'll let Ricardo sort of add to it.
So Ricardo, right-hand corner, the little mic. There you go. Welcome, Ricardo.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a major pleasure to be here. I'm a computer science by training with PhD on artificial intelligence. For the past 15 years, I was a professor. I am a professor researching AI and machine learning here in Brazil. And I started recently my own data science company with the aiming to help startups leverage their data and basically trying to bring some of the academia expertise to those startups. I have established a deep cooperation with inventors and with Manu. We go way back. Manu really likes to say that we have been doing data science before the term existed, but I think this is just gives us our ages. But we call it like computational data analysis back then. Even then, we're trying to differentiate from statistics and econometrics or so. So this is about me.
Awesome. So why don't we just go ahead and dive into it? One of the things I learned, also, Manu, as a product manager at big companies is, as you said, you really have to know the question before you can get proper data and analysis to try to go on your journey. So how do you guys suggest, we're startups here, some of us or most of us are spending money, for example, on Google ads, on Facebook ads. How do we really figure out in our marketing programs or in our website flows what works? Like, what would you recommend? Just top 3 things to like start down the path of, given it's so overwhelming thinking of all the moving pieces?
Yeah, Michelle, that's a very good question, and this is one of the things we really help our startups figure out. So initially, as you're building out a product and you don't have product market fit, the main thing is around doing lots of experiments to figure out what those things are. So I'll use examples for both consumer and enterprise because they're slightly different. But if you take an consumer company and your goal is to figure out what the aha moments are. Like, what are those pieces that allow the users to keep coming back, repeat, get in that recycle mode? And then as you sort of figure that atomic use case out, then you can actually leverage your marketing spends a lot better, right? So I actually added a few examples for this on the slides. So if you look at slide 7, And you can do this afterwards, but I'll walk you through it. So for example, on Gmail, when I was running this, it took us a while, but we figured out that if you could send 3 invites to someone within a 45-day period, they had a much, much higher conversion rate. So as you can imagine, 2004, when we launched Gmail, there's already, most everybody had 4, 5, 6 email addresses already. You didn't need a seventh one or fifth email address. And so we were trying to be a market, trying to penetrate the market when it was already very saturated. And understanding what it took to growth hack this was very important. So early on, we actually focused on figuring out what those things were. And similarly, I found that my colleagues at Facebook had figured this out, that if you had 10 friends in 7 days, and so the goal became for the team, with the product team and the data team and the marketing, to actually, as soon as a new user joins in, what can you do to actually get them to 10 friends in 7 days? Because they had a 90% plus probability of being 30-day active users after that, and 90 days and so on. So I would sort of implore your teams, startup founders, to actually really focus on finding those pieces, and data comes in very handy. So being results oriented is very important. And then having small, nimble teams that you can organize around. Somebody needs to be the asshole that asks the hard questions, gets people around. And then make sure you define the success metrics before you start those experiments. So you may run 8 experiments and one of them will work, but you know what the success metrics is. So you'll know when you get there that those experiments actually worked. For enterprise companies, it's slightly different. You don't have the rapid feedback loops you do with consumer companies, but it's the same thing. Making sure you're testing your assumptions, understanding and asking the right question of data that your customers, your enterprise customers, are giving you, making sure you have access to those data to be able to then leverage and be able to help all your clients across the board if you're a SaaS company, for example. I don't know, Ricardo, if you wanted to add something else to it.
Yeah, sure. What is interesting is precisely how do we make the questions, right? There is this phrase coined by Russell Wacoff is that says the managers who don't know how to measure what they want, they settle for wanting what they can measure, and this is absolutely true. You have to be able to measure what you want, but knowing what you want is the actually tricky part, and this is a part that it doesn't it's not enough for someone to have a data science background and be really good with the data stacks and doing data analysis. If the person does not understand the business, if they are not fully integrated with everyone in the company, they won't be able to make good questions. And the starting point of every data analysis is a good question. And let me add to this, as Manu pointed out, that defining good metrics is a very important part. So this is part of the answers from that questions that we come up with. So we come up with the questions, and now we have to be able to measure. And there are many ways to think about this in terms of what should we be measuring, but it all has to be from data collected. You have to collect the data first, right? So for startups especially, this is really hard because they are understaffed often. They won't have someone to do that. But if they don't track early on what's going on, then it's like walking on a room, inside a room that is completely dark. You can kind of feel the walls, the objects, everything that is around you, but you can't really plan anything if you don't have the full vision. So what data gives us when we collect it correctly, when we make the right questions, is it lights up the room, right? You can see everything, you can see the trends, and you can plan you can plan your path and really to where you want to get to. So, yeah.
Yeah, Ricardo or Menu, this is a fascinating topic, and we have a number of companies in our incubator. E-commerce companies, vacation rental companies. It's just fascinating. But I don't even know where to start. It sounds like we need to hire these roles out. But as an entrepreneur, I guess what we're trying to figure out here for the entrepreneur is what are the questions we should ask, or who are the type of people we could hire, or consultants? And yeah, you've got me thinking: are we doing? Are we running our companies correctly? Are we making a lot of mistakes here by not having the right data or information? We might be overpaying for advertising. Now we have many employees working on these problems, but I'm not certain we have the right people. Are we talking about programmers, or like two questions there? I guess the first question is, what is it that the startup entrepreneur who doesn't understand data science, what can he or she do within their startup to sort of begin this journey?
Yeah, no, I think, Colin, that's a very good question. People come to this conclusion, over time. At the early stage, as you build in the product, there is no data to have, right? So the key is, if you have, you need to build a product market fit and get there, right? And as you start engaging and you get beta customers and early customers, you start building a database, and asking the right questions is very important. So an inquisitive mind, and most founders have it. If you don't have it, we probably bet on the wrong founder. So, sort of nudging them along, helping them to sort of figure out what data could do. Having those conversations in board meetings and discussions is what allows them to sort of trigger it. But you can't, we can take the horse to water, but you can't force them, right? And if the founder is not convinced, or the CEO is not convinced, it doesn't matter who you hire, because they don't care as much, right? So I think it's everybody's made differently, so, for example, when I was younger, and we used to joke about, there's three different types of product managers, and eventually product managers, because you have such a large scope of things, you end up, a lot of them end up becoming CEOs as well. But as a product manager, there's three different types. There's somebody who focuses on design, so it's a design focused product manager, or a process oriented product manager, or a data oriented one, right? So the ones that are more data oriented, that already had done this in the past, are more likely to be inquisitive. But it doesn't stop anybody else from being as well, right? You're building a company, you have put everything into it. So I think exposing them to conversations like the ones we're having today, and discussing it, is what triggers them to sort of see the value of it.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out there a few things that I think, and you can tell us techniques, to get a good test going. But one thing I always think about is pricing, right? Like, what is the right price point? And I think all of us as entrepreneurs experience that at some point. You look at the, competitive layout, but then in this web, day, especially if it's, maybe a virtual product, it doesn't have to be a virtual product. There are a lot of ways to do price testing, and it may be the same price, but, you know, buy it for 1 year or whatever, and you get 10% off, or buy it month to month. There's lots of ways to do multivariate or A B test, right? That you can then dive in, see if you have, a statistical significance to help you formulate where your pricing should be, for example. And Colin, we could talk a little bit about this. Colin and I ran a company, .club domains. We did a lot of price testing. And we did it very, much in a scientific way. We decided that our first year, for example, registrations were our levers. So that was the first thing, right? You have to pin up what is your assumption, and then you can ask the question. I think, as you're saying, for example, it could be, should we have a yearly pricing, or should it be monthly, for example? And then you can run these tests to figure out, like, where you get the highest conversion. That's the great thing, right, about the internet, is you can really hone down on it. And then I think the other big area that is one, that some of our companies spend a lot of money on, is ads, right? And I think we all know you can run ads, A/B variations, landing pages, etc., and get data. But what I always did that I found very helpful is I actually would make what I called a testing matrix, just like what you said. Maybe not as scientific, but we would just say, okay, here's our assumption. our assumption is we'll get higher conversion, higher, return on investment if we do monthly only plans leading with those on the landing page. And then we would go from there and just test the assumption. And you just keep on going. Once you figure out, like, okay, people prefer to save 10% on annual, then, it brings to your mind lots of other questions and lots of scenarios to testing. And I think you always should be testing all these kind of factors. Curious about your thoughts, Manu.
Michelle, I think you nailed it. I think one of the most important experiments for data science is to figure out your conversion rates, your business model. At the end of the day, you're building a product to be able to earn, and the customers have to pay for the product you're building, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. Ricardo and I worked at a company, where I was the head of product at Low Labs. It's a gaming company. Gaming typically has 1 to 3% conversion rates for people, free people users to end up paying users. We were competing with Zynga and other large corporations. We were sort of number 4 or 5 in the game. We actually sort of spent a lot of time understanding the users, figuring out which users were paying more, and then reverse engineering and saying, okay, well, if I have that demographic, can I find more people like that? So we continuously experiment. We were doing about 3 to 4 experiments a day, trying to figure out, and then changing how complicated the game was, how hard the game was for the first 2 or 3 days for user, how easy you make it, and then we figured out that there's a curve that users would go into. If you were a very, very strong gamer, you would, if things were too easy, you wouldn't spend too much time on it because it was too easy, right? And if it's too hard, you would give up. So there was sort of an angle. Each user had to be customized to be able to figure out how quickly you would make them go through it and to optimize revenue. Long story short, we kept experimenting back and forth, and our conversions from free to paying users went from 1% to about 12.5%, right? That's a massive. The best in the industry were about 3 to 4%, and we were markedly higher. So we could have 3 times less users and spend less on marketing to be able to get the same bang on buck, right? And so our return on invested capital or advertising dollars went up dramatically, right? And so it's not just about how efficiently you invest in marketing, it's also how efficiently you actually mine your users so that you actually can get more revenue per user and more users are paying, which is also a very strong point about just product market fit. So they don't have to be separate decision making. The better your product is, the more people will pay, the more people will pay more money. And so you have to be able to have those teams not be siloed, but making those discussions intermittently. So I completely agree. And it's just like everything else, you have to experiment, test, and never be satisfied with what you have, right? And so there's always an optimization you can do to improve and get more yield out of it. And that experiment I just told you took me about 9 months, 8 to 9 months to figure out. We went from 1 to 13%, but that was a huge improvement in our returns.
I mean, that's seriously impressive. One thing that I'm also taking away from this is, as entrepreneurs, we also tend to have very good instincts and gut feelings. And I think a lot of these good tests, Manu and Ricardo, start with that entrepreneur instinct. Like, we're not saying, you're just looking at pouring through data and trying to figure out, this little gem. I feel like what you just said explains that, and it's like the perfect combination of it. I think you probably intuitively know, oh gosh, if we make it too long, so we think, our hypothesis, too hard, then we're not going to get conversion. So you really, it sounds like you really worked with a small group and you really went with that intuition to then figure out, okay, are we just making this up in our head, or is this actually true? Thoughts?
No, absolutely. I think it has to start with intuition, and then you keep testing your intuitions, right? So in the scientific method, you have a hypothesis, and you have to be open to the fact that you could be wrong, right? And being wrong is not a bad thing. It just means that that angle or that area of focus you need to do less interested, and then focus more on the other ones. So information is always useful. And even if you're wrong, it actually helps you figure out where you need to spend your next ounce of energy and dollars, right? So, I always, so data science and optimization can only optimize the hill you're on, right? It can never help you figure out a new hill as easily, right? And that's where entrepreneurs and backgrounds and intuition comes into play. So I always warn people, this is a very good tool and you depend on it to be able to squeeze every last piece out of it, but it doesn't help you find the next hill, right? And so if your competitor comes in and completely changes the way they approach a problem, and that founder had a very different insight, well, you could have the best data science team, it won't help you, right? Be careful. I mean, this is a very powerful tool and way to do things, but it doesn't replace the entrepreneur's intuition, right? I think I would put 70-80% of the bank there. But then if you build something, you need to be able to build it into a great company, and you need these tools to be able to get to the next level.
Yeah, and on that note, we're talking a lot about quantitative analysis. What are your thoughts about, I would say, more qualitative, like doing front end surveys and whatnot? Where do you see that in the whole life cycle of the testing, where you actually are hearing the voice of the customer? Maybe before the product's even released. I'm curious your guys' thoughts on that. I know in our e-commerce companies, we just, we do a lot of research. We obviously have a lot of instinct. And then we try to do small quantities in the ones that are, consumer good products. And then our test is actually selling it. But I'm curious about like how you've used, traditional surveys even in your product's life.
No, absolutely. Ricardo, you want to take that first?
Yeah, that is an integral part of the how we do data analysis nowadays. It's really hard to just use numbers because numbers will never tell you the whys. So it's really hard to know why things are happening. And the best you can do really is come up with what is happening and how it's happening. So it surveys and qualitative analysis in general, we can use it before even starting any company just to figure out if it makes sense or not. And that is a way to collect data that is more qualitative. Surveys usually can turn into quantitative data. You can count the number of people that would say they would buy some product or so. But I would go as far as saying that even interviewing people and doing focus groups, this is extremely helpful to understand things that you wasn't even paying attention in terms of putting into a survey, right? Because if you do a survey, you can only put what you know there, and there is a lot of unknowns that can be uncovered by just talking to people. At some point you need to quantify that and see, okay, is this just this person, is just this group, is this some awkward thing that is happening here, or is it broader? And then you have to integrate those qualitative analysis during the whole data analysis process. Every time you find something that seems odd, that doesn't seem like to make sense, you have to go to the user, to the customer, and talk to them and try to figure out what's going on, convert that into surveys to see how spread it is, and then try to quantify it back to data so that you can keep tracking.
Excellent. Yeah, and somebody, one research company I was using, this is a while back ago when we did a lot of surveys. I was at eBay. I remember them even telling me, like, be careful when you're doing surveys. It's just one data point. You have to look at many data points. So, the entrepreneur, the product manager, whoever it is you have leading this in your company, I agree with you. They need to be hyper focused on it and hyper curious. It really is, I would almost say, Colin, we talk a lot about culture, but it is a top down thing. And it really is something that tends to be embedded in the culture where you're really of the mindset where you're trying to always improve that conversion, that ROI, that customer satisfaction, whether it be a net promoter score, whatever the key metrics are that drive your business.
Yeah, and I often say that business can sometimes be an equation.
Yes.
right? Like paw.com, we keep, of course we have the creativity and we've invented all these new lines of products and dog beds and dog bed rugs and everything. But after you invent the product, then you got to go into, there's 7 different ways to sell this product through different methods, and how we even scale the product. We'll start with 100 units, then we'll do 1,000, then we'll do 10,000, right? So it's how do you manage that, and how does it all flow? Everything's an equation essentially, and if you can crack the equation, if you can crack the code, we talk about that on the show, believe it or not, Manny and Ricardo. We talk about cracking the code of what it takes to be a serial entrepreneur or to be successful at your startup. And today I feel like I'm learning I'm really just sitting back and learning today and listening to you two, because you two are absolutely amazing. And I think you are part of the code. I think you're onto something here that maybe we don't talk about enough. Maybe the topic, doesn't appear to be as exciting when you see it, but then when you start to think about it, going from 1 to 13, that changes the equation of your company. That really makes a difference.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Just to sort of hone it down, since you mentioned you have a lot of e-commerce companies in your portfolio, just to give an example, how the question that Michelle asked about qualitative and quantitative, just to sort of give you an example. So one of the companies we invested in called Poshmark, um, the founder was a middle-aged Indian man. Not something you would actually bet on for a fashion company. But him and his co-founder, Tracy, initially had this very unique insight that, all these e-commerce companies were very transactional. They're built by men, built for transactions, efficiency, search, but that's not how females shop, right? The retail therapy, being able to go in. And so his insight was that, just because they're built this way doesn't mean this is how the consumers want it. So he spent time understanding how females shop. He had insights from a previous company he worked at or ran called Caboodle, where people, was a precursor to Pinterest. So experience and his background and his relentless focus that it's just because men happen to be engineers and product managers and CEOs of these large e-commerce companies, this is how they build companies what they would like to shop, not how the 50% of the other world would actually like to shop. So anyway, so his insights led him to build Poshmark, which was sort of had a social angle to it, right? And that insight worked. He got traction. Um, but beyond that, in terms of optimizing it now, so Ricardo and I worked on it a little bit. We found out that there was underlying the data, there was a tertiary data that actually showed that as your cohorts decline, but in this case the cohorts would decline and start going back up again. And I had only seen that analysis or that data graph in gaming companies where you truly have a network effect, or in social networking sites. I hadn't seen that in an e-commerce company before. So we kept digging in and found that cohort after cohort actually behaved like this. So underlying, we actually realized that his insights on how he built the product actually was coming true. But now you have a very massive effect on your cost of acquisition, because as people join in and they want to invite more of their friends, they want to collaborate, and as more people join in, the value for the previous users who may have gone dormant, they come back alive because there's more people that may have the products they want. So, and it built that social culture. And I went to one of their user groups in LA. They had about 400 or 500 people, women, and the conversation was nothing about commerce or transactions. It was actually building relationships with each other. So it's very different than and that cohorts and that engagement really built a strong company. So it was a combination of his insights, but using data to figure out how to optimize those relationships, how to build those out. Actually went hand in hand together. To Ricardo's point, you can't have your left side of your brain not understand what the right side of your brain is doing. They have to go lockstep and barrel together.
Oh, okay. That's great. Good stuff. All right, we're gonna simple. We want to jump down to you, and if you have a question or a comment on this topic, thank you for being so patient. Simple.
Thank you, Colin. And I was listening to brilliant questions by Michelle, and Some terrific answers, definitely by Manu and Ricardo. Uh, Not to be too techy, and probably it might help all other people in this room. Manu, could you please tell me exactly what was that gem which made the conversion from 1% to 13% from the data science angle? You shared the intuition part, and everything is brilliant. Is there any technical part which actually contributed to this huge change in conversions?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few insights and lots of experiments. So our insights was that having seen how users were using the product, that if the game was too easy for a certain cohort of users, they would give up too soon before monetization could actually kick in. Right? You have to last in a game long enough. The longer you play a game or longer you spend in a product, the more money you will spend on the product, right? And so that's simple. So our goal was, how do you keep each cohort of users longer in our product for them to be able to actually pay? So if you were too easy you start playing the game, it's like, oh, this is too easy, I'm going to give up, go play something else because it's not challenging enough. Um, then you will lose that user and you won't be able to monetize it. You've already spent money on cost of acquisition already, right? And if it's too hard for certain users for the same game, then they would give up as well because it's not up to their capability. So what we had to then, that insight allowed us to sort of figure out, okay, well, on the same game, how do I make it easier or harder for different users? So the insights on the data actually went back into product to be able to now to understand which users are coming in. Can I figure out the users within the first day, the first few hours, so I can put them in a different track, right? So we had multiple tracks, and so it's like, well, given what this user has shown in the first few minutes of using the game, and we got better and better over time, as you can imagine, right? As we got more signals, and then we can sort of say, hey, I have a 70% confidence this user is going to be a level 3 versus level 8 off the bat. I will put them into different category, and those experiments back and forth actually allowed us to keep improving the revenue per user to go up higher, right? And then we figured out what those demographics were. So then we did a qualitative research, right? So we had another person, Professor Hakel. She went back and interviewed those people that were actually paying a lot more money. There were 3 sigmas, 4 sigmas off the average, and then she would go interview these people, figure out what their backup, their demographic, their background was, and then we would actually lead that information back into our marketing team to be able to acquire more users like that. So if I knew that this user will pay me, $500 a month versus the average of, X dollar, $10 a month, then I'm willing to pay 50 or 60 or $80 even higher for cost of acquisition because I know this user will pay me a higher revenue. So instead of looking at averages across the board for my cost of acquisition, we were able to segment them into an infinite number of categories to be able to then go after them. And so we used to then call it whale hunting. I need to find users that behave like my other top paying users and find more of those users. So did that answer your question? I know there's a lot of technical details that we went underneath it. I also hired economists. We had data scientists. We had a very multidisciplinary team to be able to think out of the box. And what we didn't have on our team was any marketeers. There were engineers, data scientists, economists, people that didn't know what couldn't be possible, right? A typical marketing person would sort of say, well, these things are not doable, so I'm going to do it the traditional way. I had a disdain for that. And so we found ways to make it work outside of the traditional norms.
Uh, Brilliant, Manu. I mean, thank you. Brilliant. And thanks, Colin, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I know data science. You're going a lot deeper than we normally would. With like normally the way I would think about a business, but KPIs are so critical when it comes to setting up your startup. And if you can figure out the right KPIs, just figuring them out can sometimes be very challenging. Cost of acquisition, lifetime value of a customer, ARPU, cost, whatever it is, like just figuring those things out can be sometimes very tricky. And if we can figure them out, we can actually begin to move the dial in many different ways. So can you talk just a little bit about the KPIs, either Ricardo or Manu, that businesses should be thinking about? I know that's sort of high level. That's a bit more high level than going into like detailed, ROAS, return on ad spend, right? But that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, I'll take do a high level answer there, and then I'll have Ricardo take it from here. But KPIs matter or depend on who's actually consuming it, right? If I am a product manager or a customer success manager, the data that or the KPIs I need to be able to manage my stuff is going to be different to what the CEO or the VP or somebody else may consume in the startup as well, right? So to be able to KPIs are there to make helpful decisions. And the person consuming it needs to be able to understand those pieces as well, right? Um, so in the gaming company, for example, we had dashboards on our TV screens, probably over 100 of them, right? It mattered to which person was running the experiments, which things were important, and could you move the needle to the main company goal. So you have to have simplify your KPIs at the company level, so that here's the 3 or 4 levers that are the most important. Now you may have sub levels and sub levels underneath that, and that's okay, right? That's where your teams are actually looking at 3 layers below that one KPI. But to be able to understand that these lower level KPIs or tertiary level KPIs are actually boiling it up to the top level KPIs, and they're making a difference in what the company needs to move to, right? And then you're testing these assumptions. So maybe you had the wrong KPI for the first year or two, and then as you learn more, the more data becomes available, and then you realize that hey, there's a different piece that actually is a leading indicator, right? You don't want your KPI to be a laggard indicator, right? So if you find that something else is actually the primary cause, well, then you look at that more, right? It may not be your revenue is usually a lagging indicator, right? Customer engagement, if you have a leaky bucket, that's going to affect your revenue down the road. So how do I fix those things? So I focus on things that either help me with growth, engagement, retention. Um, if you're a SaaS company, net revenue retentions are very important metrics to look at, not just the top level revenue, because revenue and as NPS, which is the qualitative metrics of how well your customers actually like your product, is very important because that tells you long term, whether they will recommend referrals and other pieces as you build your product and company out as well. So
and
I don't
NPS,
know if
you're
I answered that
talking
question.
about the Net Promoter Score. You're
Yes,
talking, yeah,
that's right.
and that's a fascinating. That's a whole other topic, but that's a fascinating one, isn't it? And it's really a simple measurement technique. You can Google it on the internet, Net Promoter Score. If you've never heard of this, it's something every company should just take a look at. It's a very simple survey method, which can give you a number, and they've shown that with that Net Promoter Score, that some of the top companies like Apple and Harley Davidson, they've done extremely well, and a lot of it's related to the fact that they have people who are enthusiasts. They're recommending that company to their friends and family. So yeah, I know if you're new to like startups today, like we're doing a lot of acronyms and stuff like that. But I just thought I could come in and talk a little bit about Net Promoter Score. We should probably do a show on just that alone. Invite you back.
Yeah, I'm just gonna jump in real quickly before we go to Jim. Um, One way that I have often found is good in terms of thinking about KPIs is I look at competitive similar companies. If they're publicly traded, I go look at what they're saying in their filings, what they're saying on their quarterly calls. It can be, a big eye opener for you. For example, like I said, we sold .club domains to GoDaddy. So I would look at our competitors' quarterly earnings and their calls and what they were saying in press releases that oftentimes can give you some pretty strong proven hints about things to think about and experiment in terms of how to really drive your company to be more profitable. Thank you. But I really want to get to Jim. Jim has a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. And Jim, we'd love to hear your question or any insight you have for our members and our folks here on the stage. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Michelle. Very interesting conversation. It's above my head in many ways, but that's fine. Uh, I, Early on in the conversation, we're talking about A/B testing. So I got a couple thoughts here. If, say, a startup person has a product, they're bringing it to market, they're kind of like in the initial phase of testing price points, their copy, their images. The first part is that, do you run multiple testing or experiments at the same time, or do you say do price evaluation first and then go to another, say if it's the product images, and then go to the copy? How would you suggest for a person bringing a new product to market and it's already live, say it's on Amazon or their Shopify store? What would be an easy way for them to start building a data set and start making some informed decisions? So that's my
Well,
question.
this is a very good question, and it's really hard to answer because there is a lot of nuances on how to run A/B tests. I think it was Michelle that mentioned multivariate test that allows you to test many different variables at once, so you don't have to run a lot of different A/B tests. But my personal preference is to run a very small number of A/B tests that you can focus and learn from that. I often find that there's this statistical phenomena that happens that if you run a lot of tests, some of those will be positive by chance, right? Because there is always the possibility that when you run an A/B test, the difference, even though it's maybe statistically significant, it's not really. And the more tests that you run, the higher your false positive will be. So it's not advisable to run a lot of A/B tests simultaneously unless you have a lot of variables that you can work on and can segment a lot your market, and that is not the case at all times. So my personal preference is run a small number of A/B tests, maybe just one single A/B test at a time, and really dig into that and learn everything that you can from that, and then go to the next one. And I'm not even considering the budget that you might have for that, because A/B tests can be expensive to run. If you run multiple discounts for many different segments, that can be quite expensive. But not taking into account, my main worry of running a lot of A/B tests is false positives, and that you'll be learning things that are not true.
Yes, that's what I've noticed also. Just a follow-up question. The length of the test, should there be a certain time frame, 7 days, 14 days, say, if I'm out there testing price points? Is there any uh, time frame that will give you enough data? Hopefully you have enough sales that you can take a look at it.
There is this. You can look online and that you can find equations or even online systems that can calculate you the power of a statistical test, and that requires you to have certain number of data points. So the time that you're going to be running an experiment will depend on how many data points you're going to be generating. So if you are selling only once a day, then you might have to run that for 2 weeks, 30 days even. If you are selling multiple products an hour, then maybe running through a day is enough. It all depends on what is the sample size that you have and how confident you want to be on the difference that you are observing from the difference on the A and B tests. It's really hard to say 1 week is enough, but it really depends on the number of data points they're generating.
And just another follow-up. So say if a person does run it for, say, 2 weeks, should they abandon that for, say, 30 days and then revisit it? Or what's your feeling on going back to an A/B test, say, on pricing? What time frame should you have a rest period in between testing?
I'm not sure I have a good opinion on this. You mean you're running an A/B test, you didn't finish it, and then you stop that and return after a while?
Well, here's an example. Say if I launched an item and it's, say, $39.99, but I looked at the competition. I always try to be in the top quadrant on pricing. That's my goal always when I have a product. I will not be in the top quadrant price point wise, but you know, I want to kind of test to seeing if 39.99 is doing well. I'll, put a couple of variables in there, but my ultimate goal is to get to 49.99. And without changing any other variables, meaning images or copy, and say in the original test, I was able to move it up to, say, 42.99. But should I just let it rest there for, say, 90 days and come back and gather some more data, some more sales, and then go back and test higher price points? I guess that's a more specific question.
I
I
think
I,
you're.
I, I, I I can take that question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the way to do A/B experiments that could actually, without messing up what you have already, is to actually do it on a smaller cohort, right? So you're not exposing everybody. So like if the A/B experiment is negative and is bad, I wouldn't want that to sort of ripple through all my user base, right? So typically, a statistically valid answer would be, I get 5,000 people exposed to it roughly. That would give me, 90% plus confidence level on my A/B results. Then, I don't need to expose this to everybody, right? I will get my answers on how effective my A/B test is, and then I can roll this on to everybody else, right? So that's just good sort of rollout product management piece. And if it was negative, and if my changes actually caused negative effect, well, I don't want that to ripple through across the board. So I think that may be a better process to follow.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you for your answers. I greatly appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
All right. Like I feel like I'm learning so much, but I'm also feeling kind of guilty, Colin. I don't know about you.
I'm
Um,
feeling like I missed a few classes in college.
yeah. Well,
You know.
I have done this kind of thing, but it's been a long time. I'm just being,
Yeah.
honest here.
I feel like we're
But
only scratching the surface.
I know.
We haven't really figured out that there's probably so much to learn that could make such a huge impact on our businesses
Yes,
from
there
data
is.
science.
We
You
just,
know,
and I think it is a discipline, right? Manu and Ricardo, like it really, we kind of need to set that tone and start asking some of the questions. I think, Manu, you said that in the very beginning. Somebody has to, I'm sorry, I don't want to offend anybody, but somebody kind of has to be a bit of an asshole and just start asking the hard questions and demanding, a test to answer those questions and not just believing people's feelings, right, about things.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
going to ask, could AI, help with this too? Like, could AI actually help solve some of these problems we have?
Yeah,
absolutely.
great question.
No, that's a very good question. So actually, there's a couple companies, if I can plug them in, two companies that I invested in, but Ricardo's actually being on the data science part as well. So for Step Function, this company, StepFunction.ai, they actually help companies figure out what their churn might be, right? Because churn can come from everything, the customer interaction to NPS score to product releases to a bunch of other things, and how they're using the product. If my engagement changes, well, is that a signal that eventually this person may churn out? So understanding that can actually really help your customer success team to focus on high value items and focus. So rather than spending hours and hours and hiring data scientists, and data scientists like Ricardo are not easy to come by, right? They're expensive, they're hard to come by. The right one may not happen. So can I leverage other SaaS tools like Step Function to be able to plug in and give me the insights that I need to be able to make that work, right? So they do this very effectively for SaaS companies to be able to get to those answers. Um, for e-commerce companies, there's another company that Ricardo and I work with, called Out of the Blue. And so, when you look at events that happen for an e-commerce company, you could have a war started in Ukraine. Well, that could affect your sales, or it was too cold and UPS couldn't. There's a whole bunch of things, but those are big, sort of systemic things that can happen that can change your revenue or your sales. But there's a whole bunch of things that happen day to day, right? Maybe one of your pricing was off, or servers were down, or something else happens. And how do you keep track of all these events that happen once your product is live and running? And so this company Out of the Blue manages all these complexities and boils it down to a few KPIs that your teams that are on the ground acting can actually take and work on, right? So knowing that this is a hard problem, how do you simplify it? Can you have a scalable AI solution that can actually help you get to those answers? So there are solutions. I don't think it's easy for most people to hire a $300,000, $400,000 data scientist, and if or you can do it part time. So Ricardo, for example, I mean, 3 or 4 hours of his time a week is actually an average statistician or data scientist could spend 2 weeks trying to figure the same thing out, right? So more solutions in AI are coming through. Regenerative AI, things like ChatGPT, all these things will improve how quickly you can get the data. But as we mentioned at the beginning, having more information is not always helpful. Getting to the right answers is and asking the right questions is the battle. And some of these companies are helping figure out, well, if all these e-commerce companies have these questions and they keep coming up, maybe if you're starting any e-commerce company, well, do you have to rebuild everything from scratch, or could you sort of step on giants that are already there? And so Out of the Blue tries to build that level of expertise so that you don't have to worry about rethinking everything again. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. It's just so much wealth of information here
Yeah.
in such a short period of time. We're out of time. But we've got Vahid on stage, and I really, Vahid, I don't know if you have a question or thought about this whole data process. Appreciate you also jumping on stage there. And
Hey, good morning, everybody. No, love that. This is an amazing room. I came in. My wife is in a deposition, so I have to be quiet. Um, what I wanted to say to Ricardo is that you have those outliers and false positives. I contacted 3 days ago. I contacted one of these SaaS companies that I was getting my photos from and images and vector files, and I asked them. I've been a client for 4 years. I didn't renew my subscription. One of my guys wanted to use it again, so I contacted them because the price has gone up $50 from last year to $150. So I sent a message. I was like, "Hey, do you guys customer support?" I said, "Do you guys have any coupons running for 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 your product?" And the customer support replied back the next day, "No, we're not running anything." I said, "Okay, sure." So I went on the page, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna sign up for it." I went to sign up, and he gave me a 20. So then I screenshotted that and I sent it to customer support, and I said, just within the last 2 days, I told 3 other people that your prices have increased, but your price is actually almost close to what it was last year, and you could have had 3 more clients, but I referred them and I told them you were expensive because you didn't have any coupon going on. So sometimes they're losing business because there's a disconnect between the people within the company. Like they don't even know that their shopping cart is offering a 25% discount, and they could have had a couple of clients paying. So you're absolutely right. They got to see the data. They got to look at the data. I think one email coming to customer support like that should be taken. Imagine how many people don't email the company and support it. So I think data, looking at it, and sometimes we're involved in the company too much, so we baby it too much. Sometimes bringing outside people and looking at the whole thing, see what's going on. The little things make a big difference. That's what I wanted to share.
That is a great point. It adds up to what we were talking about with Jim. Is sometimes this happens because of the many A/B tests that is happening, a lot of experiments that happen in the company, and they are not tracking them properly because it's way too much for the small team they might have. So one hand does not know what the other hand is doing, and this leads to this kind of problems that you
But Ricardo,
experienced.
wouldn't you agree that your best client is your old client? I feel like you already got them and everything else. They already know what your product is. They have an account with you. They got the credit card or PayPal or whatever on file. So I feel like the number one goal should be, trying to revive those or get those or just make sure that those are raving fans to begin with versus going spending so much money getting new clients. But it's another way of thinking about marketing. So I feel like that. And this company in the last 12 months that I possibly have not, been with them has not sent me a single email that, hey, by the way, you use your system for 4 years. What the heck happened? Why you're not using it anymore? Right? Nothing. So to me, I'm looking and I'm all like, how many millions of dollars are they like throwing away on Google ads and Facebook ads? But they could have had so much clients from their previous clients and they could have done the retention. So it's just something to look at.
Yeah, no, but Vahid, that's a very good question. So let me make a slightly alternate point. For this company, they should have recognized before you actually churned to actually reach out to you because there's enough signals that you were going to churn out, right? So just to give you some data points, so that our company Step Function, has helped lots of companies. But just to give you an example, with Mitel or with Autodesk, which is one of their clients, they were able to reduce churn by 50%. So before it happens, before you got dissatisfied and sort of said, "This money, I don't, this it's not worth my time or money," and they could have intervened and sort of said, "Hey, maybe if I give you a discount now, or can I help you, or what is it about my product that is dissatisfying you?" And being proactive before you actually churn out is actually very critical, right? So yeah, I can go get you back after 6 months after you've gone, but it's so much better that 2 months before you were actually going to churn out, if I could predict that, then I could spend my energy and retaining you better, right? Um,
And it could have been
and
easy. All they needed to know
yeah,
is that I haven't logged in because I'm
yeah,
I'm not personally using this. My team is using these images and graphics. And so the minute that they could see that for 1 month, 2 month, 3 month,
yeah,
nobody logged in, to me that should have been like a red flag. Why is this person
yes,
paying for a SaaS company? Let's say $20 a month, right? Or $10 a month, and they haven't logged in. Let me find out what's going on. But I feel like sometimes would you say that maybe they're hesitant to send that email to see what's going on because then they might alert you and then you might want to go on your credit card saying, well, they just told me and I'm not using it. Let me just go really cancel now, right? Instead of, a lot of company just hoping that people forget about their subscription and they make a lot of money by, users like me, for example, for 3, 4, 6 months, I paid and I didn't use anything. So that would be a good split test for me to know that is it better to reach out when they don't use it, or you just let it go because you're providing a service, but technically you're collecting free money?
yeah, that's correct. And so companies like Step Function allow you to do that without having, you know, to have somebody like Ricardo, they're constantly looking at data, right? So can you proactively do these things? So I think companies, this is where, it separates uh, you know, uh, uh, asking the right question, making sure, hey, if churn is important as part of my long-term LTV, and I need to make sure I have the right resources, the right tools in place, and so those companies eventually will do better, right? And for every category, there's multiple players, and eventually the ones that actually focus on customers, build relationships, do all the right things will win. And data is an important part, but not the only part, as Ricardo mentioned that.
Yeah, I don't know why it's getting so much difficult than what it was 10, 15 years ago. Or has it always been like this? I feel like the co-founders and CEOs of companies now go through more pain and suffering and cruel and unusual punishments because we started late, maybe. Maybe Colin could give it that input on why is it more difficult these days now.
I have no idea. Yeah, I'm sort of with you on this one. Like, I don't have the answer to that question. I do like the fact that earlier, I think, Ricardo, you brought up this idea of engagement and using that as a metric to focus on. Like, so at Dot Club, we would track religiously the engagement level of the domain names, because we knew when someone used a domain name, they kept that domain name, they paid for it, and your renewal rate was almost 100%. I mean, it's $10 a year, right? It wasn't a lot of
Usage.
money. It was all about usage, right? We even had it was one of our core values. Usage is
Yes,
everything,
that's right.
right? So that it's interesting you brought that up. But we do have to close out the show today. Michelle, any last thoughts
Yeah,
before
I
we?
mean, I've immensely enjoyed this, and so thank you, Manu and Ricardo. Just real quickly, if somebody wants to get in contact with either one of you, what is the best way for that to happen? Manu, obviously, you work for a VC firm. Ricardo, you work alongside Manu doing this analysis. What would you want people to do in order to reach out to you, Manu and Ricardo?
Yeah, I mean, people can reach out to us through our website. We have a info@inventuscap.com, and one of our team members will definitely respond back.
Sorry, can you say that again?
It's at the top.
Oh, it's at the top there. Is that Inventus? Inventus dot inventuscap.com, because just for the podcast listeners as well. Just want to make certain inventuscap.com. Got it.
Excellent. Well, I've learned so much, and you've reinvigorated me a little bit. I'm thinking about little things that I need to do for the businesses that we manage, just to get better, more, unbiased input into what the company's doing. But if I had to name a couple of things to suggest to people, I'm going to say do your net promoter scores. You'll learn a lot just from the customers. And I think even at the base level, make sure you have Google Analytics installed. And then, thirdly, I would say I'm going to work on a high level segmentation. I'm not going to make it over complicated, but I'm going to do a couple of high level segmentations of my customers, because you're right. Like, we should be targeting and spending money on our, buying and better customers. So you've reminded me of these things, and I feel like I'm putting them on my list to start next week. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Michelle and Colin.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely appreciate it. Thank you.
If
Thank you very
I
much.
may, sorry, if I may ask another one question for Manu and Ricardo, is that time? Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Manu and Ricardo, just thinking about uh, on the healthcare sector, when we talk about clinical trials and other things, there is one uh, absolute issue when it comes to patient recruitment and patient retention. If you have any idea how data science can help, a lot of surveys, but the dropout ratio is around 90 plus percent. Can AI come into this, or data science really? Any thoughts on that?
Simple. I'm sorry, but we could not really hear you very well, and you were breaking up.
All right, Michelle, I will contact Manu and Ricardo.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've come a little bit to the end of our hour here. We actually went over a little bit. It's great conversation. And thank you, everyone, for joining Manu Ricardo for your expert advice, and for everyone who came to the session and everyone who shared their experience. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Be well.